Hi, folks. Welcome to our December webinar. Hello, everyone. Welcome. You guys are the early birds. I appreciate everyone's promptness. If I weren't giving the webinar, I would not be early. See my coworker Tara on there. Tara, you can report back to Karen that I should never be allowed to drive this myself, as I've already messed up. Hi, Addie. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll give folks a couple more minutes to get on here. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you all for the last webinar of 2024, counting down the days. All right, I like to give folks another minute or two, but while we're doing that, if you want to drop your name and where you're from into the chat. Looks like a slightly smaller crew today. I feel like everyone's winding down and getting into holiday mode. I know I sure am ready to be into holiday mode. But I appreciate you folks for being here today. And of course, this recording will be available to watch afterwards. So if you know anyone that wanted to come and couldn't, they can always just watch it on our YouTube channel afterwards, or website. Hi, Armand. Bucks County, Rolling Harvest. Hi, Rolling Harvest, folks. That's my hometown. I was born there. Well, Doylestown. Nice to see you guys here. Welcome, everyone. If you want to just drop your name and your organization or where you're from into the chat as you come on in. Chalfont. Yes, I had a lot of friends in Chalfont growing up, of course, one town over. The Pennsylvania connection strong. All right, welcome, everyone. Great. We will go ahead and get started here. As folks enter, they can catch up. So thank you for coming again to the last webinar of 2024. We are excited to see you here and kind of round out this year's year of learning and working together to talk about sort of what we saw happening this year and what we can expect for next year. Some notes while we're getting started here, quick reminders, drop your questions in the Q&A as we go. The chat goes by really fast. It's hard to catch it, so we can miss questions that are asked in there if you put them into the chat. This is being recorded, and as I said earlier, recording of this presentation will be emailed out within the next few days. And then finally, we'll provide links at the end of the webinar. If you want to request a follow-up meeting or register for the next webinar, you can do that at the end of the webinar here. So when we think about 2024 and looking at trends, one of the things that I've seen really come up in a number of ways is assessing where we are in our efforts to reduce food waste, which makes sense. If you think about it, if you were at our conference, this is what I talked about. 2025 is 5 years away from 2030, where we have sort of the big, audacious goal of reducing food waste by, what was it, 50%? And that is coming up really, really fast. So we see that starting to kind of get into the consciousness of industry this year, and folks are taking a look at that. So Refed, if you missed it, I highly recommend this article. I pulled out some of the highlights from it, sort of took a look at that. You know, if we take stock of progress, what are folks finding? Well, the UK really is quite a leader. They are down 27% in the amount of food they wasted since like 2018, 2017. And their household food waste is down 31%, which is just mind blowing. So UK is, spoiler alert, a global leader on this. Japan's also had some success. They have rates that look like they've dropped in about the same time period by 18%. So they're really making inroads there. It's not quite that 27% we see in the UK, but that's an impressive amount of reduction in overall food waste. And then we get to the US. And now there is no national effort to assess food waste, but Refed, who's really been working hard on getting the data sort of uniform and understandable and get a real grip on what's happening in terms of food waste, said that in the US, we are up just under 1%. So at least it's under 1%. But that is not the big strides that we want to see in terms of food waste reduction. Similarly, I don't know if you saw this headline. I've talked about this. So if you've been anywhere near me in the last 6 months, you've probably heard me talk about this, or 3 months. There was a big article in the Washington Post based on an article in Science Magazine that said that of the states that have implemented a food waste ban to try to cut food waste, there's 5 of them, only one has succeeded, and that was Massachusetts. All of the others have really not made the inroads that they wanted to see. And again, I talk a lot about this in that keynote from the conference. So if you were there, you can go back and take a look at that. There's a number of reasons why states have failed, but for Massachusetts, why did it succeed? Infrastructure. They created infrastructure. But of note, the infrastructure that they created to deal with food waste was compost. So it's not really, at least according to this report, food recovery that has allowed them to reach those goals. It's composting. The second trend that I've kind of noticed is a focus on household food waste. And if you look at Refed, for example, their estimates of what portion of food waste is coming from what sector, retail's actually gone down and household food waste has gone up. So it's not a surprise that there's been sort of the shift in thinking that we need to look at focus on households. And this is really evident if you look at sort of 3 areas. One is national and state level efforts to educate households and the general public on the sort of perils of food waste. So the National Strategy on Food Loss and Waste has a big section on consumer food waste, and a lot of states are starting to focus on consumer education as well. And they're putting their money where their mouth is. This year, we saw more grants that were being offered to folks who were looking at that were either educating the public or looking at how we can impact household food waste. Because again, in the US, it has not budged. Um, and there's also been academic research. So anybody that was at ReFed or Waste Expo this year, and this actually was true at a local conference as well. The local Pittsburgh Food Policy Council put on a conference here this spring, and there was an academic researcher there as well. And in all three cases, there was a researcher who had done some research on household food waste and how can we impact household food waste? What do we need to do to bring that down? And again, there's been funding specifically for research on how to bring down household food waste. Pennsylvania just had a big grant that was focused on that as well this year. And then finally, we're seeing more consumer products coming to the market. Two big ones are Lomi and Mill. Mill was also at ReFed and Waste Expo. And these are looking at how they can create a product that in a home kitchen will take whatever food waste there is and turn it into compost really quickly without the smell, without the need for a backyard. And in Mill's case, actually, this is sort of an aside, but I thought this was really interesting. They collect data on how much waste is going into their unit every week or month or however they're measuring it. And they found that households that use Mill, their food waste actually goes down, not just because they're composting it, so they're not putting it in the garbage, but it's really creating an awareness of how much food they're wasting. And so it's bringing it down. So I think we're going to continue to see this being a really big area of focus because households are sort of the Wild West and really difficult to bring down their rate of food waste. And then third are trends in charitable giving. And there's always trends in charitable giving. So what are they? Let's take a look. So in at the end of 2023, I did not write down the source for this. I mean, I have it written down, but I can't remember what it is. I'm so sorry. If anybody needs wants the source for this, just send me a note and I can get it to you because I have the article up. But there's a organization that looks at charitable giving trends for nonprofits every year. And they found in 2023, they saw a dramatic dip in numbers of donors as well as dollar amount and retention. In 2024, they saw those trends continue, especially when it came to number of donors. So the donors are continuing downward. So this is year over year change. So if donors in 2023 were down 7.6% from 2022, and then again, they're down 3.9% in 2024, that's a smaller dip than from 2023, but it's a continual decline. Interestingly, the dollar amount was up at the end of 2024, which means that what we're seeing is fewer people giving and a real reliance on some of those larger gifts, which can be really hard to get, as we know. So we'll talk a little bit about what this means. As part of that, we also are seeing the end of ARPA and the SLURF. I'm not sure how else you'd say that, but those are the funds that were part of the pandemic response, right? And so those were federal funds that often were allocated through local areas to provide relief to communities that were struggling with the effects of the pandemic. I can tell you that locally in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, our ARPA funds are ending, and our county budget just had a major crisis on how they were going to actually be able to continue to fund the health and human services that the county provides because of the loss of this funding. And that is something you're going to see across the board. I think everywhere is facing this. There are tons and tons of articles out there on how the end of the ARPA funds are going to really impact the services that are being provided in local areas. And of course, that is going to impact the social safety net, all of the organizations that we work with, and we're really going to feel that in our community. And then finally is the change in the federal landscape. So in 2024, the Biden administration announced a national strategy for reducing food loss and waste and recycling organics. It was a really comprehensive document. It was super exciting. They announced it during ReFed this year, and it really signaled a acceleration of federal efforts to support and promote the reduction in food loss and waste. As we know, Biden did not win the election. So this is up in the air. If we had seen a different result in the election, we could talk about this trend and say this is something that we expect to see continue in 2025 with a lot of support coming in the federal government. But as I'll talk about in a minute, that has changed. So those are kind of the big trends that we saw in food recovery this year, and in sort of the space that food recovery is operating in. When we take this all together and we look ahead to 2025, it kind of sends us some signals on what some threats are and what some opportunities are. So first, let's start with the change in federal landscape, because that's huge. And that just is a giant question mark. You know, there's been a lot of headlines about how this one, a wrecking ball. Experts warn that the Trump win is going to set back global climate action, that it's pretty hostile. The administration is expected to be hostile to climate efforts. So that could really impact us. And as we know, also, there's been a lot of talk about really stripping the federal government and federal agencies to the bare bone. The USDA, the FDA, the EPA, the three agencies that have been leading the work on food waste reduction, their future is uncertain. We really, really don't know. It's a giant question mark. What is going to happen? There are some reasons for panic. But I will say there's also some reasons to have maybe a little bit of hope. In the first Trump administration, um, there was a lot of support for reduction in food waste. So the 2018 Winning on Food Waste initiative was under the Trump administration, and that was sort of the first piece of the federal efforts to bring together those three agencies, USDA, FDA, EPA, to look at how they could, work together to create a united front against food waste. And that support was renewed in 2020. And then I went out of order here because that was sort of the big thing in my mind. But we also saw that there was this U.S. Food Loss and Waste Champions, which was a public-private partnership which was announced to highlight organizations that were businesses that were really working on cutting their food waste footprint. And the Trump administration partnered with businesses on that initiative. So we saw some signs in the first administration that if they continue, that food waste will not be completely jettisoned, or the effort to attack food waste. So right now, there's definitely a wait and see where the federal government is concerned, but I think there's also no opportunity here to focus on the states. So while we sort of wait and, bite our fingernails and white knuckle it, waiting to see what's going to happen, there's opportunities within the states. A lot of states are picking up the slack, or are, we know what they're doing. We already have that landscape already laid out. Pennsylvania, for example, has really put an effort into reducing food waste. California, of course, Maryland, lots of states have been jumping on this bandwagon. And I don't think we're going to see that trend reverse. I think we'll continue to see states working on the issue of food waste. So that is somewhat hopeful. And when we think about how we're going to hit those 2030 goals, with or without the federal government, I think there's a opportunity and a indication that we need to focus on infrastructure. We go back to the early slides where Massachusetts was the only state to make inroads, and that's because they had an infrastructure. Granted, it was compost infrastructure, but that idea that if you want to reduce food waste, you have to have some sort of infrastructure to deal with it. It's not just going to disappear on its own, is super sensible, right? So, how can we use that? Well, first of all, we have to be aware that there's a threat. The threat is that other states will see that the food waste bans aren't working and say, oh, we tried. All right, they don't work. Let's move on to the next thing. There's already been some pushback from businesses in some states to say, well, this food waste ban can't, doesn't apply to me because there's nowhere to send the food. California's already had a bill proposed that was, I don't think it passed, but it was sort of like negative. In other words, bans don't work, so we shouldn't be held accountable type thing. There's a misunderstanding on how to scale. A great example is food waste infrastructure grants that might focus on giving refrigerators out. We know we're not going to refrigerate our way out of the food waste problem. That is only part of the problem. So if we don't do some work there, the focus on infrastructure is going to be misaligned with actually what we need to grow. And then there's that last bullet, investment into the wrong things, whether it's through grants or public-private partnerships or other efforts. If we don't understand how to actually scale food recovery, it will not be a viable solution for reducing food waste. On the flip side, this is an opportunity. We've got a growing industry within food recovery. It is growing by leaps and bounds. If you think back to anyone who's been in this for a long time, think back to like 2015 when ReFed was just getting started. And it was really hard to find other organizations, other people doing food rescue to talk to. That is not the case anymore. So we have the body of expertise, the body of knowledge that it will take in order to sort of turn that tide and get investment into food recovery in a way that will actually make a difference and help us hit those goals. And so I think we need to think of this as an opportunity to go out and educate and help funders, legislators, policymakers, everybody that is looking at this problem understand how food recovery can be part of the solution if it gets the right support. Um, Secondly, thirdly, I don't know what number I'm on, the industry focus. When we think about hitting those 2030 goals, we already talked about this. There's a lot of switch to thinking about households or adding households into the mix. This could be a threat too. It's the big sexy, right? Where could we make a huge difference because there's not much has been done? That's households. It's really tempting to think, okay, well, you know, if we have not come down at all on households, any effort is going to bring that down, meaning that's a really easy win. That could mean a drop in funding for food recovery, but also not focusing on households is a threat as well. So we really, as an industry, need to think about how we can fit into that goal and how we can be a part of it. I think, um, and I'm would be interested to work with some researchers to really look at this and get some evidence that food recovery is a really great ally in educating the public and reducing household food waste. If you think about, so we operate with volunteers. The Food Rescue Hero Network has had something like 55,000 people download our app. That's 55,000 people that thought, oh yeah, ending food waste is a good idea. Can we work to educate those volunteers and help get their household food waste down as a natural sort of consequence of their partnering with food recovery. And if you think about all of the food recovery organizations in the country, that could be the easiest first step in reducing household food waste, which then makes that an opportunity for the food recovery industry. Funding. I mean, this decrease in funding is a threat, right? There's no other way to say that or think about that. We are all nonprofits, or most of us are nonprofits, right? The majority of the industry is nonprofit. If there's a decrease in charitable giving, a decrease in funding, that is a threat. Not every organization will survive that. And the loss of federal funding opportunities is huge. It's a huge loss. So, really, this is something as an industry we need to be watching and thinking about how are we going to make sure that we are able to continue to fund the work that we do. And I think there's a couple of opportunities here. One is earned revenue. I've also talked about this ad nauseum, but there's a lot of opportunities for food recovery organizations and folks in this space to monetize some of the things that they're already doing. One such example would be 1115 waivers, which are Medicaid waivers that provide reimbursement for provision of either medically tailored meals or nutritionally dense or appropriate food to people with chronic health conditions. So, couldn't that reimbursement come to food recovery organizations that are providing food to Medicaid clients? That's just one example. We need to start thinking creatively about how we can work to leverage those opportunities as an industry to support the work that we're doing. Individual giving, we're going to have to continue to rely on individual giving. That's just the reality of it. But how are we going about getting those individuals to learn about what we're doing and support us? I think that we are going to all have to be really savvy about individual giving. That's going to be a really important part of our funding mix, especially as foundations maybe tamp down a little bit too. So keeping ahead of the trends is really key. And I know it's not easy. A lot of us are small organizations or just starting out, may not have a full uh, development staff, full fundraising staff, but even a little bit of sort of research and keeping abreast on fundraising trends can help make you more efficient and impactful. Um, Corporate giving, man. Corporations are donating their food, but in some cases, we're doing them a favor. You think about California, where they're required to donate food. We are the infrastructure that makes it possible. So, is there an opportunity there for corporations to help support the building and maintaining of the infrastructure, which happens to be food recovery orgs, that help them meet their sustainability goals and those you know food waste bans that they're required to hit? And then, of course, we have to continue to make the case better. And I know we're all doing the best we can, but I think continuing to look at trends, hear how we're talking about food recovery, assessing what's resonating with people and what's not, and really helping the public understand that it's not about, just giving money. It's about being part of the solution. And this is actually really, really a really powerful thing for a lot of people who are feeling kind of panicky about the environment and the climate and like they can't do anything. Food recovery and supporting food recovery is one opportunity for them to be making an impact on the climate. And then, of course, just getting back into that, like getting nuanced about how we are um, asking for donations and how we are fundraising from individuals, making sure that we're really kind of looking into the trends, figuring out how people are giving. For example, print. Just want to draw your attention to that. Only 15% of people anymore are inspired to give via a print ad. So if you're still doing huge mailings to people, just blanket mailings, that may not be the best use of your resources. Maybe if you can target groups that are specifically responding to print and do a smaller mailing, and then put some of your resources into email and social media and your website and other things like that. Um, yeah. And then this is really timely. I had to drop this in there. I did not know this. I think this is really interesting. 57% of recurring donations start on New Year's Eve. 57%. So make sure that you are sending out an email on New Year's Eve that says, hey, why don't you donate for the year, get your donation in? And by the way, would you like to make that recurring monthly? A lot of us aren't asking. We need to make sure we're making that ask and really being timely about that and getting them when they're most likely to make their donation for the year, which is right here at the end of the year, at the end of the cycle when they're trying to, I don't know, get their tax dollars in or whatever. Um, we need to make sure that we're asking them to make that recurring. So yeah, I think that is the last slide. It is indeed. We're going to take questions in a minute. I just wanted to say next month in January, we will be talking about food donors. I know that is something that is always a hot topic for folks. So make sure we'll drop the link to register into the chat. Make sure that you sign up for that webinar. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if folks have any questions. Let's see. Where's the Q&A? There's the Q&A. Okay. There are no questions. Wow. Okay. Did I answer everything? Like I said it all. Everyone's good, right? Does anybody have any questions or comments or things that they'd like to talk about? Please drop them into the Q&A or into the chat. I'd be happy to talk about them. Give you all a minute to think about. Is everybody just like ready for Christmas or Hanukkah or time off? I am certainly with you. I'm ready for this godforsaken year to be over. They all seem stressful these days, don't they? All right, there's a question. Yeah, the fundraising stats. We can absolutely get them. Hey, Sedona, can you just go into chat and ask Danielle and Karen where those came from? Go into Slack and maybe drop that in the chat. I have it, but if I try to navigate away and find it, I'm going to lose the webinar or hang up on everybody. So it's best left to somebody else. We'll get those and drop those in. Yeah, so donor advised funds are probably, first of all, they might be considered a different category grant if that is, those are just individual givers. Tara, if you, who I know is on the call, if you have any insight on that and want to drop that into chat, please do. But also, if you think about the number of individuals that give, most of them are just giving fives and tens or 20s or 30s, and they're not really going to be part of any donor advised fund. Okay, Leslie McCollum says, you talked a little bit about refrigeration not being the best investment. Do you have other suggestions about the most effective way to target food recovery funds? I do, and no one's going to like it, but general operating funds for food recovery organizations. Food recovery is even with a great piece of technology, it's still really hands-on and it takes people to do it. If you think about the act of doing a food recovery, most of them are happening, there's 100 pounds or less, right? And if you want to really actually solve food waste, you're going to have to get those 100-pound or less donations picked up and gotten to somewhere that can use it right away, 7 days a week. And that is a very laborious logistical puzzle that takes a lot of people power. It's not refrigerators, it's not trucks, it's that people power of making that logistic puzzle hum. There's certainly things like technology that can help, but in general, I think operating funds for food recovery organizations are it. So again, and as an example, if you think about, for example, garbage collection, right? If how we handle garbage from households is we send trucks around to pick it up once a week. And the trucks are one expense, but a lot of the cost of that is the labor. And without the labor, nothing works. You can make an investment in a truck, but again, without the people to drive those trucks, it just doesn't happen. Um, Not sure it's directly related, but I'm not in the food recovery industry currently, but I'm trying to transition my career. Any advice? Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We need more people in food recovery. If there's no food recovery in your city, or county, why not start one? Um, and I think getting really educated and engaged in the community, not just coming to webinars, although thank you for being here, that's awesome, but checking out ReFed and the Zero Food Waste Coalition, looking at what the local food recovery organizations are near you, if there are some, and just really kind of diving in. Is there a good resource to use to share or advocate to our pantry clients about household food waste statistics? Yeah, the EPA has a lot of stuff for individual households, and I expect so does your local state, maybe even your county, depending on where you live. I think there are a ton of resources there. I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that you shouldn't create your own though. If a Google search doesn't turn up something that'll work for you, that or the EPA doesn't have something, because you probably want something to really target your clientele specifically. So if you had something that would make the case for why they specifically should care about food waste and why it's important, um, I think that would be maybe more meaningful than just a generic EPA handout. Um, Yeah, Leslie said, thanks. That's a lot of what we've been supporting for the past few years, so that's validating to hear. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Anybody that's supporting the work that food recovery organizations is doing, that is what is needed. And I guess that's the other thing I would say is if you really want to support food recovery, go ask food recovery organizations what they need. Don't assume, um, not that you are, but don't. I feel like there's a tendency to conflate also a food bank and a food recovery organization, and they're both really important organizations doing really different work. So if you want to support food recovery, ask food recovery organizations what they need, and they'll tell you, and it's probably going to be funding. Um, Let's see, as a nonprofit, how can we improve our infrastructure for composting? Our office is located at a place with a lot of green space and was wondering how we could do more in that regard. That's a great question, actually. And there's a couple of things you can do. It doesn't have to just be composting either. For example, where we are, there's an organization that does will put a biodigester at your location, and so you can turn your food waste into energy. There are other, both nonprofit and for-profit compost organizations in a lot of places. So I would check and see what resources that already exist. Hopefully you don't have to reinvent the wheel and figure it out on your own. But if you do, then I would say just putting in a backyard composter if you have the opportunity. That's a great way to, reduce the footprint of your office. Because, we have lunch there, right? So we're tackling our own sort of household food waste at our office, aside from the work we're doing in food recovery. And then the final thing I would say about that as well, is I knew I had something else to say and I completely forgot what it was between starting to talk and finishing my sentence. So I'm ready for the holiday too. If I think of it, I'll mention it. Oh, I know what it was. I got it. Animals. So that's the other thing you can do is you can partner with local animal nonprofits or even pig farms if you don't have a nonprofit. A lot of There's a lot of like animal sanctuaries, farm animal sanctuaries, even zoos. We have a wildlife rehabilitation clinic here. There are pig sanctuaries because pigs will eat almost anything. So pig farms are like a common place to take food waste, but maybe you even have a pig sanctuary and then it's another nonprofit. But that's another opportunity to dispose of your food waste in a more environmentally friendly way than throwing it away. Can you talk a little more about state food waste bans, how they work, and what goals they implemented and why they were considered failures? Yeah, so there's 5 states with food waste bans. Um, New Jersey, Massachusetts, New York, Maryland, and California. California's is the most robust. It actually has uh, uh, both a carrot and a stick in it. So for for businesses that don't meet the food waste goal, they could pay a fine. The rest of the bans have a lot of asterisks in them. So businesses are not responsible for preventing their food from going to a landfill, for example, if there's no compost facility within X number of miles, right? So most food waste bans are really focused on composting, not food rescue. Even California, it's 20% diversion to people versus 80% to compost. Um, and that's for edible food waste too. That's not just overall in general. Why they were considered failures is because they aren't appreciably reducing the amount of food waste going to landfills, at least not in the amount that people wanted. And again, that's happening for a couple reasons. One, they're so full of holes that businesses don't actually have to follow them. When they and the holes are that there's not the infrastructure there. So if it has to be within 30 miles of a compost facility and there's no compost facility within, there's like three compost facilities in the state, then most of the state won't be responsible for sending their food to the compost, right? You're only getting a few small areas. That's one. And then the second would be that the understanding of what it takes to actually scale food recovery is generally not well known publicly. Most folks outside the industry don't understand it. They think or thought that food banks would be able to just take all that food and get it to people without it going bad, not realizing how food banks and food pantries work, and we're not ready for that at all. So I think that to flip that around, what would make them successes would be like Massachusetts is to focus on making sure that the infrastructure exists or that it's built up. And that if you have an area that is all of the businesses are not compliant because there's no compost facility, well, build a freaking compost facility there, right? Like that's pretty obvious. And then secondly, support food recovery. You know, again, ask the food recovery organizations what it takes, what they need, how food recovery could successfully divert 20% of that food, what do they need, and then make it happen, which is going to be an investment, of course. But I think the states have already shown that they're committed to investing in this. They just haven't really understood how to do so in a way that would make sense and be successful. I hope that makes sense. Um, all right, I think that's all the questions we currently have. Are there any other questions? Um, so Donna, were you able to get those links for folks? Yes. Yes, you
I
were.
was, yep, just put them in the chat.
Great. So if you go to the chat, there is a link to afpglobal.org. They had a lot of great resources. I know our Vice President of Advancement, who shared that with me, gets a lot of insight from there as well. So that's a great resource to start. If anybody has any other resources, feel free to drop them in the chat. All right. Are there any other questions that we haven't answered? Well, I just want to say two things. First, with this email that you'll get with the link to register for next month's webinar, I believe there's a survey. I think we send it out all the time about what you think of the webinars. Please fill that out. Our attendance is up, so I think we're providing good information, but we'd love to hear any feedback that you have. If there's anything that you really want to see a webinar on or any guest speakers you want us to bring in, let us know. In 2025, we're going to try to bring in more guest speakers. I'm tired of hearing me talk. You must all be as well. So we're going to bring in more folks to talk about some really specific areas of expertise, but I would love your feedback on what those areas are. And then finally, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody for attending these webinars and really always providing such great conversation. I always go back and look at the chat, and you all have so much insight and expertise and interesting things to share and say. So, really, thanks everybody so much for being with us here in 2024. Yes, I love you all. I love this industry so much. And I really look forward to seeing you all in January of 2025. What a crazy thing to say. All right. Was that Jake? Did I see Jake say something? I missed it. Yeah, Jake, more Jen. Please, Jake. All right. Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays to you all. Take care. Bye.